Thank you, Steve. Well, if you have your Bibles, go ahead and turn to Solomon, the 3rd chapter, verses 1 through 5. You read it earlier. I'm not going to read it again. We're going through a sermon series called What the World Needs Now. And this is, I just titled it, Who My Soul Loves. I could have written romantic love because the world needs the right kind of romantic love, just as we do today. I know there's a holiday tomorrow that people get off from, and for people in school, they have Friday off as well. So it's a 4-day weekend for quite a few of the people in our community. But today is Valentine's Day, so happy Valentine's Day for you, and I'll receive your greetings as well. It's that day whenever we are encouraged to express our love to those that we are attracted to. Now, we might be attracted to them in a good kind of way, like they're a friend and they do things for us. We have a friend attraction to them. You might be following the directions that you received when you were in elementary school. You know, in elementary school on Valentine's Day, you're supposed to give an expression to everyone in the class. And so you get one of those little things of cards that has 25 or 30 or however many that are in there. And you have to give an expression to everybody that's in your class or in your circle, which has always created a great dilemma because you only have a certain number of cards and sometimes they don't say the things that you want on them. Especially for those people that you don't even really like, you're going to have to give some expression of love to them. You're going to like, I don't know. You know, Jerry's pretty mean, and so I don't know if I want to give that one to him. Definitely not going to give this one to him. Which one can I possibly? It's a hard thing to do whenever you're put in a situation to express love in a required kind of way. But you might be in that situation where you just say, I'm just saying hello and happy Valentine's Day to everyone. But no matter how you approach it, you can't get around the fact that this particular holiday is focused on expressing love to that special someone in your life, which makes this day a financial opportunity for those who stock up on cards and jewelry and candy and flowers, all hoping that you're going to buy their stuff in order to express that love. And while giving and receiving stuff might not be your love language, it is for a lot of people, and so they kind of look forward to this day. There are actually a lot of people who plan intentionally to have their wedding on this particular day, thinking that it might benefit their marriage to be born, to have their marriage on Valentine's Day. I'll be honest, I did deliver some Valentines this year. I had someone who bought one of those bunch of Valentines, and they said, hey, we got more that we're going to give. Why don't you take some? And I'm like, okay, I haven't done this since elementary school. And so we went through, we had a number of them, and we gave out Valentines to people, and they were great. It was kind of fun to do, and at least as far as I know, everyone who received one has received it well. And if they didn't tell me about it. So I'm hoping that they enjoyed it. But I'll be honest, this is not a holiday that we really focus on in our house. Marcy and I don't give much attention to it because one of her first jobs was keeping the books at a flower shop. And the sale of flowers at inflated prices to desperate husbands and boyfriends hoping to avoid getting in trouble by acquiring that culturally demanded Valentine's gift was enough to sort of turn her off on the whole thing. It's not that she doesn't mind receiving an expression of love or even giving them, but not when it's required. You got to do it. And she certainly enjoys movies and books with romantic themes, but the sweet peachy sort of variety. And we certainly have our own romantic moments, but not because it's a certain day. It's not because it's a requirement, it's because we love each other. There are others I know who simply struggle with Valentine's Day because they sort of think of it as Single Awareness Day. They're single and they almost seem like this holiday implies that there's something wrong with them for being single. And I just want to encourage you to say that there's nothing wrong with being single. The Apostle Paul was single. Jesus was single. And I think they lived pretty fulfilled lives. But regardless of how you may feel about how this special day is celebrated, I hope that all of the attention that it gets has turned your attention to how romance should be celebrated. How it should be celebrated according to God's way rather than to or by the world's way. Romantic love is something that God has given to us. It is something that He expects for us to enjoy and experience. But talking about romantic love can be an uncomfortable topic, and so often the church doesn't talk about it at all. At the same time, we don't want people learning about romantic love from the world. We should listen to God and what He has to say about it. However, God, since He has created us in a way in which most of us are inclined toward wanting to experience it, we often want to know what it's like. But since the church is silent and the world is not, our focus is often moved from what God defines it as, from this natural, healthy attraction between a man and a woman that culminates in marriage, into an instant satisfaction of our lust at the expense of another person in less than healthy circumstances. And that's really the difference between God's way and the world's way. You see, God really wants something better for us than what the world has to offer. When romance is experienced as God planned for it to be experienced, when passion and faithfulness are intertwined, that kind of love can even be held up as an example of our own love for God, which is not only found in the Song of Solomon, as we'll see as we get into this study, but it's also how the Apostle Paul, in his letter to the Ephesians, is described love for God. He equated love for God as the love between a husband and a wife. Our study today, though, does focus and begin with romance. Romance is not reserved for the young, but the stories of first love that often involve them are inspiring. Even those of us who enjoy a long and healthy love life will often recount those early days in our relationship with all of their passion and uncertainty and pressures and pleasures and angst and delight. And we tell all these wonderful stories about how we got attracted to one another and how we ended up with one another and how we stayed with one another and how we continue to express our love with one another. Those stories should be remembered and celebrated, and by remembering them, they should move us forward in our passion and our love for one another. But my guess is, as was noted when the scripture was read, that after reading these verses in chapter 3, 1 through 5, that you might be a little confused by them. It would probably help if you knew who was talking, to whom she was talking, and who her soul truly loved, why her love was missing, what their relationship was at the time, and why she and he, for that matter, where they were in the story of their life together at that moment. If you didn't know, the Song of Solomon is a dramatic, poetic, Hebraic play about the power of romantic love enjoyed God's way. It's sort of like a Shakespearean play. Each scene has its location, its characters, its dialogue, and its actions. The order in which these scenes appear are very carefully crafted. They are arranged in just a certain order to bring about a story in a very dramatic way. The time sequence jumps back and forth between what is the present for the characters and their remembrances of the past. But unlike Shakespeare's play, we are not always told exactly who are speaking the lines, or even where each scene begins and ends. They don't correspond with the English Bible's chapter breaks, which can make this a very difficult book to understand and to enjoy. But even like Shakespeare plays, they can be a little confusing themselves, and it has all those extra things. Another aspect of this book, which makes most people shy away from it, and what makes the church sometimes not sure what to do with it, is the rather bold, romantic, even graphic language. It's almost like peeking into a private love letter with its raw, sensual, voluptuous descriptions of what physically attracts one person to another, and their desire to be, intimate with one another one day. I'm going to give you an example, and I'll give you a warning in advance. This is taken from verses 6 and 9 from the 7th chapter. It is not necessarily PG language. We find in that text these words: "How beautiful and pleasant you are, O loved one, with all of your delights. Your stature is like a palm tree, your breast like its clusters, and I long to climb that tree and lay hold of its fruits." It's unmistakable what Solomon was talking about. You won't find that sort of love language in your average Valentine card, and for good reason. It's a little too forward. It's a little too uncomfortable. It gives the wrong implications that could be misunderstood. And although I'll be honest, my wife showed me a post from some of my friends on Facebook, and they were sort of imagining what those little candy hearts with that say "Be Mine." They were saying, "I wonder what those would look like if King Solomon had written them." And they took quotes and sort of put them on those little things. And I'll also say that they weren't PG either. And in fact, they were the kind of things that maybe a husband and wife should give to one another, but probably not anyone else. The words I just read were spoken by King Solomon. But the woman to whom he spoke them to didn't want to have anything to do with him. She was being groomed to be his wife, but she was doing everything she could to escape, to run away. She was the original runaway bride. You have to remember that King Solomon had 700 wives and 300 concubines. And among them, there were quite a few who longed for King Solomon to speak to them in that same way I just read. They wanted that interaction with him. But this particular girl that he spoke those words to was not that sort of girl. And we're going to learn more about her story later. When this book is taken from the historical, literary perspective, this book does not promote premarital or extramarital sex, as some think it does, who use other interpretive schemes. It does not condone lust in any form or fashion. It is quite the opposite. It promotes a faithful love between two people who really are romantically attracted to one another. It's important to be attracted to one another if you're going to get married. I remember working with a young couple who wanted to get married, and they'd come to me for counseling, and I asked them, "Well, do you like each other? Tell me how you got attracted to one another." And they go, "Oh, we don't love each other that way." What do you mean you don't love each other that way? When you look at the other person, you don't, your heart doesn't pitter patter. You don't like what you're seeing. You're like, "Oh no, it's a very platonic relationship." So I don't know if you want to get married then. You're not attracted to each other. And so they went on their own way. They decided not to seek my counsel because I was not telling them what they wanted to hear. Man, you should be attracted to the person that you're going to get married to. This young couple that appears in the Song of Solomon were definitely attracted to one another. And we even find some scriptures in the Song of Solomon where they're flirtatious with one another. And they even talk about their desire to one day embrace one another. They look forward to the love they have for each other, to be woken up so that they might experience it in God's way. So we hear the story as they navigate the maze of emotions and opportunities and obstacles while remaining pure toward one another until the romantic attraction can culminate as God intended in their marriage and they can embrace the joys thereof. And what they have is the very thing that King Solomon is longing for. But since he's not going about it God's way, he seems to never find it. You have to remember that King Solomon might have been the wisest person in the world to ever live, but he drifted away from his faith in God, and his resulting behavior was not rewarded by God. Having as many wives and concubines that he had, and granted some of them were because of contracts with other countries and the like, it isn't necessarily the way God planned for him to live his life, nor encouraged him to do so. But let's get back to our text. The beginning of chapter 3 is definitely not a dream, as some commentators advocate, and is often added in the English chapter headings of several versions of the Bible. But it is more of the remembrance of a young, beautiful Shulamite girl who had been taken by force into King Solomon's harem and is remembering her true love. Her remembrance is of a time whenever they were having and resolving a lover's spat. But that is not where the play begins. Back in chapter 1 and in the beginning, through the beginning of chapter 2, describes the opening scene which takes place in King Solomon's palace. The girls of the harem are talking to one another back and forth about their infatuation with King Solomon and how lucky this girl is to have gained his attention and to be brought into his harem. But the Shulamite girl contends that she just doesn't belong, and she doesn't want to be there, and she doesn't love King Solomon like they do. King Solomon enters into the chamber and, using all of his charms, tries to woo the Shulamite girl, but she successfully resists him and the pressures by the other girls to embrace his rather bold advances. He tries to persuade her to love him more than once in this scene, but she resists each time, and she resists by remembering the one to whom her soul really belongs, who she truly loves, a shepherd boy in her hometown who'd already stolen her heart and from whom she has been separated. The rest of chapter 2 and our text at the beginning of chapter 3 form a second scene. The location shifts from the palace to her home in a rural part of the kingdom. The scene opens with this dashing young shepherd showing up at her house and trying to get her to go out with him, which she desperately wants to do, but she realizes that it would be, well, not the right thing to do. And so she refuses on grounds of impropriety. But it just wouldn't be right. He insists and tries to get her to come out with him, but she rebuffs every effort. He finally sort of leaves in a huff. But she expected him to return that evening after his work with the flock was done, but he doesn't show up. One night turns into two. Several nights go by, and she becomes worried about his safety because he usually shows up and he's not showing up, and she doesn't know what to do. She finally goes out to look for him because she is so worried about him. She searches through the night. She walks along the streets. She inquires of the watchman. And then suddenly, as she's trying to find him, she spies him. She sees him. Her worry so abruptly relieved sends her running into his arms, and they embrace, and all is forgiven. Then, like a gentleman, he escorts her back home. When they arrive, she invites him in, but not into her room, but into her mother's room. They do, after all, because of their attraction toward one another, need a chaperone. She was a wise young lady, and he a smart young man. But in verse 5 of chapter 3, it's the first line of the next scene. The Shulamite girl is back in the harem. Her remembrance is broken. And she warns the other girls who are part of the harem not to try and force their love to awaken. That is, to make themselves love someone that they don't really love. She's put off with her efforts to try to make her love someone that she doesn't love. She encourages them to wait and to let love awaken on its own as it had done for her when she first met the one whom she loves, the one whom her soul loves. For those of you who are married, you probably remember that time when your love woke up. I certainly can remember when my love woke up for Marcy. I understand the passion that this girl was remembering. When I counsel couples to get married, I remind them that there's only one reason that they should get married, and that's because they really love one another. They are attracted to one another, and they want to live their lives for one another. They want to take care of one another and serve one another and live their lives together. I tell them that there will be other people who notice that they're attractive. There will be other people who see you and say, I like what I see. And they will make that known. I tell them that they will probably do all kinds of things to get your attention, just like King Solomon was trying to get this young girl's attention. But whenever you say yes on your wedding day, you are already saying no to anyone else that you may ever meet, regardless of their attraction to you. Because you've already given your heart to someone to whom you are attracted and who is attracted to you. You already have what everybody else is longing for. If their love for each other is that sort of love this Shulamite speaks of, then it is going to be there for your whole life. Once it awakens, there's no way to put it back to sleep. It is God's design in a man and a woman to have this sort of love awaken between them at the same time, drawing them closer together. There is nothing as comparable, nothing stronger, nothing more compelling nor satisfying than this sort of love that wakens up in our lives and draws us to one another. And we don't want anything getting in that way. And Solomon was doing everything he could to get in the way of this young girl's love. Spoiler alert, if you're going to read the rest of the book, and I encourage you to do so, King Solomon fails. He fails to seduce her. He fails despite his best efforts to charm her. He fails to move her love from her first love to him. And eventually the Shulamite girl is reunited with her shepherd, and they get married and live happily ever after. I hope that you and your true love will also